The 2024 salary cap is much higher than expected, plus free agent targets for the Bills at quarterback, running back, and tight end. We've got a lot to cover today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Well, folks, welcome. It's a busy week ahead of us here on Locked On Bills. It is time to fully dive into free agency and the players at each position that the Bills could target that makes sense to me. Obviously, players that will fill needs, but also through that filter of what the Bills can actually afford. And so we are going to break down every position group and talk about who the Bills should target in NFL free agency. Today on the podcast, we're going to cover quarterbacks, running backs, and tight ends. And we're going to spend the most of our discussion on running backs because I feel like that's the biggest need of the positions that we're going to cover today. So we'll call that the meat and potatoes of today's episode. We're also going to cover Brandon Beane's Combine press conference. The NFL Scouting Combine is this week. He's scheduled to meet with the media on Tuesday afternoon. And so we'll probably get some pretty good nuggets out of that. Probably some questions about, or at least hopeful to get some answers through questions about some of the roster decisions and, of course, the NFL draft. So we'll have some things to cover there. And then next week on the podcast, I'm going to get you my mock offseason, something I've done every single year, where I go through and I say, hey, this is exactly what I would do. These are the salary cap saving moves. These are the players I bring back. Here's the contracts. These are the outside free agents. This is a mock draft. We're going to do all of that here today, or excuse me, here next week on the podcast. So this week will set the foundation for kind of finding those targets and figuring out what makes a lot of sense. Our next episode of Herd Mentality will come early next week as well. And so I would encourage you, if you have questions, players that you're curious about, I would holster that stuff until the weekend. There's a good chance that I will cover a lot of the potential free agent targets that you had in mind that you might be curious what my opinion of them are. So let's get through this week, send those in over the weekend, and then Monday we'll probably spend a lot of time reflecting on the players that maybe I didn't cover or guys that you had questions about, et cetera, et cetera. All right, let's get into it here today, and I want to start with the salary cap update. Over the weekend, some huge news came out in the NFL, and that's that the salary cap is going to come in a lot higher than expected, and that's obviously great news for the Buffalo Bills. So the original expectation for the 2024 NFL salary cap was that it would be $242 million. And the Bills and all the teams in the NFL would have up to $242 million to spend on salary for players. Well, the NFL announced that the 2024 cap is actually going to be $255.4 million, a massive increase, not only from the expectation, but also from where it was in 2023. And as I said, this is great news for the Buffalo Bills. The Bills now have $13.4 million less in salary cap space for Brandon Beane to clear. Now, obviously, this is helpful for every team in the NFL. It's not like the Bills were singled out and received $13.4 million in cap space. Every team got this. So let's first of all acknowledge that every single team benefits from this. But you would think that teams like the Bills, like the Saints, like the Dolphins, the three teams that were north of $50 million over the cap based on the previous projection. Those are the teams that really feel some relief from this news. Now, let's be mindful that the Bills are not completely out of the weeds. They're not even close to out of the weeds. They're still over the salary cap by $43.75 million. There's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of levers to pull and roster gymnastics for Brandon Beane to do, but there's $13.4 million less of that is required. The bottom line, it's a much more favorable cap position for the Buffalo Bills. Now, as for my expectations for this improved cap position, I still don't think the Bills are going to be in on expensive free agents. I'd be very surprised if the Bills signed anybody to a contract that pays them an average annual salary price tag of more than $8 million per season. I still think that they're shopping at the same stores that they did last offseason, as Brandon Beane said they would, right? He said we're going to shop at the same stores. The most expensive contract they handed out was Connor McGovern. I think you'll see maybe a deal like that, and the rest will be more along the lines of the Taylor Rapps and the Trent Sherfields and the Damien Harrises and the David Edwards, right? Those are the types of contracts that I'm anticipating. Maybe you get a Connor McGovern type deal. Maybe you get a Deontay Hardy type deal as your quote-unquote big tickets. So let's still have our expectations in the right place. The Bills aren't suddenly going to be signing Michael Pittman and T. Higgins and Mike Evans or whatever, Antoine Winfield. Those aren't players that are feasible for the Buffalo Bills. So let's keep our expectations in the right place. The bottom line is that, Brandon Beane now has $13.4 million less in salary cap space to clear just to become cap compliant before you even start talking about adding salary. I think maybe a more practical way to look at the real implication for this is that prior to the news, I was thinking that the Bills probably had a chance to bring back one of Daquan Jones or AJ Epenesa. Perhaps now there's a path for both of them to return, or maybe whatever two bigger ticket unrestricted free agents that the Bills had as expiring contracts. Maybe you can find a more favorable path to bring more than one of them back into the fray. But the bottom line here, great news for the league, great news for the Buffalo Bills, and $13.4 million less in salary cap space for Brandon Beane to become cap compliant, but still over the salary cap by $43.75 million. All right, folks, coming up here in just a second, I'm going to break down like 6 different free agent running back targets that I have in mind for the Buffalo Bills. So be sure to stick with me. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. You can bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. They've also got football's futures bets available for you, hockey, whatever sports you're into. FanDuel has some fun action that you can check out, and it just makes all the games that much more exciting. So just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. That's a great deal that they have for you, new customers, $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Again, FanDuel.com/lockedon. Shoot your shot at FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All right, folks, let's talk free agent targets. We're focusing in at running back, where the Bills have James Cook, they have Nyheim Hines, and they have Reggie Gilliam, the fullback, under contract for next season. The expiring contracts for the Buffalo Bills, Latavius Murray, Ty Johnson, and Damien Harris. Those guys are all expiring contracts. I think the Bills need to add some depth here. Obviously, I'm sort of assuming that Nyheim Hines is back. I think they have some things to figure out with his contract. And so if your top 2 backs right now are James Cook and Nyheim Hines, you can look at that and feel very obvious that there's some skill set missing there in terms of size, short yardage ability, pass protection, right? The Bills need to find an answer to complement these players that already exist. So that's That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for size, physicality between the tackles, pass protection. And I think there's some very appealing players out there that the Bills can target. Now, these are not Bills targets, but I do want to acknowledge the big names out there across the NFL. Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Tony Pollard, Saquon Barkley, Austin Eckler, DeAndre Swift, Devin Singletary. Those are the big names across the NFL, and I don't think the Bills are going to be in the market of any of those players. I think some of those are going to be potentially north of $10 million per season, some, 6, 7, something like that. This is not the price range for the Bills. And honestly, if the Bills had $100 million in cap space, I wouldn't advocate for those types of players. I think they're in a perfect position to enjoy the services of James Cook on a rookie deal, and you can add a low-cost veteran to kind of complement the things here. One shout out there is Devin Singletary, who I'm just very impressed with the career that he's putting together. Very durable, dependable, consistent player. That backfield in Houston, that was supposed to be about Dameon Pierce, and Devin Singletary went there and took it. He took it from him and became the lead ball carrier for the Houston Texans. You have to feel like there's a decent contract out there and decent opportunity for Devin Singletary to be viewed as a number one running back for some team across the NFL. But let's talk about the Bills targets that I had in mind. And I will say that Ty Johnson has an expiring contract. I'd love to have him back in the mix. Obviously, time on task in the system and with the players. Has some speed, can catch the ball a little bit, has some physicality, really nice depth player. I'm hopeful that the Bills can bring him back, and it should not be more than a very modest 1-year veteran minimum type contract. So I am fully advocating for the return of Ty Johnson, but you could still look at this backfield last year and feel like the Damien Harris player was missing. And obviously Damien Harris, knee injuries early on, the neck injury, they shut him down. I don't know that there's a future there. I don't know if you want there to be a future there just based on his durability issues, but that skill set is what this team kind of missed last year, and it's a reason why Josh Allen had to have 15 rushing touchdowns. They needed that type of player, and I think they could find that in an outside free agent target. Let's get into him. The first one I'll bring up, D'Onta Foreman. D'Onta Foreman, my first target for the Bills in free agency at running back. Foreman is 27 years old. He turns 28 in April, 6 foot, 235 pounds. Most recently, a running back for the Chicago Bears this past season. He was their RB2 behind like Khalil Herbert, who's a nice player for them. And Foreman this past season had 109 carries, 425 yards, and 4 rushing touchdowns. And he came off 2 really nice seasons before this in Carolina in 2022. Stepped in when they traded away Christian McCaffrey and did a really good job. And then in 2021 with the Tennessee Titans, when Derrick Henry got injured, he came in and that running game really didn't have a drop off at all. He's a player that I think has had 3 nice seasons that he's kind of reestablished himself in the NFL, was a reasonably high draft pick, and then he had an Achilles injury, and it took him some time to come back from that. But the past 3 years have been strong indicators to me that he is all the way back from that injury. To me, he just makes a lot of sense for the Bills. I love the style in which he plays. He's a very physical, angry, aggressive runner. 235 pounds. Definitely fits the profile that I'm looking for as a between the tackles runner. And he's got some speed for a 235-pound back. This isn't a guy that, is a plotter, right? I'm not looking for a plotter that can just fall forward and run hard, right? I'm looking for some guy that has some juice here. And he's got some acceleration for a 235-pound running back. I also love his ability to win after contact. I think that's a missing trait from this Bills running back situation. D'Onta Foreman absolutely delivers that. He's got a career average of 3.02 yards after contact per attempt for his career. So very strong in that capacity. And I also love that Foreman has proven himself able to have some heavy workload games. Even this past season with the Bears, he had a couple of different games north of 20 carries and had a bunch of those with Carolina and Tennessee in the previous 2 seasons. I think that the cost here makes a lot of sense. I expect him to sign a 1-year deal that pays him around $2 million, maybe pushing $3 million. So a little bit on the higher side of the price range that I'm looking for. But I think because he's such a great target in that he can catch the ball a little bit, has some proven production, yards after contact, has the size, has some acceleration. Right, this I think is really a blend of exactly what the Bills need. So I'd be very, very excited if the Bills were to sign D'Onta Foreman in free agency. The next guy that I want to bring up is Rico Dowdle. Again, Rico Dowdle, 25 years old. He turns 26 in June. Was a 2020 undrafted free agent out of South Carolina. Spent his career with the Dallas Cowboys to this point. Rico Dowdle is 5'11", 215 pounds. Has some explosiveness about him as well. 4.54 in the 40-yard dash. 38-inch vertical jump, which is the 86th percentile for NFL running backs. 127-inch broad jump, 92nd percentile among NFL running backs. So 215 pounds with 4.5 speed and good explosive metrics that you could tell when he runs that he's got some of that straight line ability, some of that ability to generate some power from his legs. I love that about him. Most recently, he's been a backup running back in Dallas. Very quiet start to his career. But this past season, he was the RB2 behind Tony Pollard, had 91 carries, 372 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 2.96 yards after contact per attempt. So love that. He's very close to 3 on that metric. 19 catches this past season for 158 yards. So he had some production this past year, but he really didn't prior to that. 2020 through 2022, played a total of 14 snaps. So got his opportunity this year. Obviously, Zeke Elliott has been part of that running back room, and he left for New England in free agency. It was Pollard and Dowdle really kind of emerged this past season. A player that I was pretty fond of at South Carolina. You could just tell watching him there that there was a professional style about the way that he carried the football that I think makes a lot of sense for the Bills to add. And I think there's some untapped potential here because he hasn't had a ton of opportunity, but he did have 91 carries this past year where we got kind of a glimpse into what he offers. Why does he make sense for the Bills? Well, it's the skill set, right? If he checks the boxes in terms of size, power, physicality between the tackles, can catch it a little bit, he'll be inexpensive. And so I think this is just a lot of the dots you connect them, and he makes a lot of sense for the Bills. I do wish that he had a bigger resume in pass protection. Only 22 snaps of pass pro for his career. So that's kind of the question there. We're talking about a guy that should be like a 1-year, $2 million player that absolutely fits what the Bills need and in the right price range. The next player I'll bring up is Ezekiel Elliott, 28 years old. He's 29 in July, 6 foot, 228 pounds. Most recently, our running back for the New England Patriots was the backup to Ramondre Stevenson, and then Stevenson had some injuries. He became the lead back in New England on a bad offense. This past season for the Patriots, Zeke Elliott, 184 rushes, 643 yards, 3 rushing touchdowns, 2 of those coming against the Bills, actually, this past season. Also had 51 catches. And this is a guy that has a very proven ability to win in short yardage and score touchdowns. 12 rushing touchdowns in 2022, 10 in 2021. So this is a guy that can take that piece, that short yardage piece in this offense that the Bills, I think, need to relieve some off of Josh Allen. Why does he make sense? In so many ways, he's the exact skill set that the Bills need. Short yardage, pass protection. He's a veteran in the room. You know, this isn't Zeke Elliott from, 5-6 years ago where he's highly paid back, top 5 pick in the draft, the focal point of an offense. That's not where he's at in his career. So, make sure that you understand I'm not advocating for Zeke Elliott for those reasons. It's because of what he is at this point as a veteran, between the tackles, really good pass protection resume. And I think that having a veteran like this in the room would be a benefit for James Cook, as he's still a very young player in the NFL. As for the cost here, I think it should be within reason for the Bills. Last year for the New England Patriots, he signed 1 year, $3 million. I'm not sure he did anything this past season that would make it higher. I mean, he was coming off of 12 rushing touchdowns in 2022, and he signed 1 year, $3 million in New England. There's no reason that it should be any higher than that, as he's a year older with obviously a lot less production than he had in the previous season. So Zeke Elliott firmly on my radar for the Buffalo Bills. Here's the next guy. This might be the big ticket of running backs that I'll bring up. So keep that in mind. A.J. Dillon from the Green Bay Packers. He's 25 years old. He turns 26 in May. 6 foot, 247 pounds. Ran a 4.53 40. Talk about explosive numbers. 41-inch vertical jump. That's the 96th percentile for running backs. 131-inch broad jump. 97th percentile among running backs. A.J. Dillon, most recently the backup running back in Green Bay behind Aaron Rodgers. This past season, not Aaron Rodgers, Aaron Jones. This past season, 178 rushes, 613 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, also added 22 catches. And he's been a fairly productive RB2 over the last couple of seasons. As I mentioned, 613 yards this past year. In 2022, 769 rushing yards, 7 rushing touchdowns. 2021, 828 rushing yards, 6 rushing touchdowns. So there's some production here that you can point to for A.J. Dillon. Why does he make sense? Well, he's 247 pounds, physical downhill runner. 2.96 yards after contact per attempt for his career. He's had a very similar role in Green Bay to what I think the Bills need, right, as a complementary piece. Aaron Jones, a very different runner than A.J. Dillon. I think James Cook, a very different runner than A.J. Dillon. I think they would complement each other very well. Experienced player in pass pro. And I still think there's some upside here based on his youth and based on the athleticism that he has. As far as cost, SpotRack.com projects him at an average annual salary of $3.5 million. PFF says $4 million. That's higher than I want to invest, but again, upside and skill set. Now, I'd take Deonta Foreman for $1 million less. But if you really wanted to have an upside play here with some youth, with some athleticism, obviously A.J. Dillon can fit the bill. The last running back I'll bring up, and this is kind of a sleeper, but a guy that I've always had a soft spot for, that's DeeJay Dallas. 25 years old. He turns 26 in September. Most recently, he's been a depth running back for the Seattle Seahawks. Was their RB3, really. It was a 4th-round pick in 2020. I absolutely loved him at Miami. Has very little career production across 4 seasons in Seattle. And, you know, Seattle has had DeeJay Dallas as a 4th-round pick and then proceeded to draft Ken Walker and Zach Charbonnet in the 2nd round while they still had DeeJay Dallas. So that definitely says something. But there's something about this skill set that I watched at Miami that's very appealing to me. Again, across 4 seasons, not a lot of production. 4 seasons in the NFL, 118 carries, 481 yards, 4 touchdowns, does have 61 catches, but he has a very robust resume on special teams. He's a true 4-phase special teamer. For Seattle, he was never on like the field goal team or the field goal block team, but kick return, punt return, kick, punt, he was on all of those units and has been a very good performer. So you get a boost to your special teams, but also the type of skill set that the Bills need, like physicality is all I could ever remember about DeeJay Dallas at Miami. Just a guy that runs extremely angry and has that size and athleticism and profile that fits what I'm talking about in terms of short yardage, pass protection, has caught a few passes in the NFL, and as a depth running back, you know, that special teams ability I think matters a ton here. And he should not cost much at all. We're probably talking about a $2 million or less player. So my deep sleeper for the Buffalo Bills would be Seattle Seahawks depth running back DeeJay Dallas, who I think could check a lot of boxes for you, especially that special teams box as a depth player that should not cost you very much. So there's the running backs. I said we would talk a lot about them, and we'll still talk quarterbacks and tight ends here in just a moment, so be sure to stick with me. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. Have you ever considered what you would do if you had an extra hour in your day? Would you exercise? Would you read? Spend some time with a friend or loved one? Maybe catch up on some sleep? A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you most so you can do more of it. Therapy is helpful for learning positive coping skills, how to set boundaries. Therapy empowers you to be the best version of yourself. It's not just for people who have experienced major trauma. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you do is fill out a brief questionnaire that'll get you matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOn. All right, folks, let's talk quarterbacks. Let's talk tight ends here in this last block. At quarterback, the Bills have Josh Allen. They have Shane Buechele, who was on the practice squad this past season. And, of course, the expiring contract of Kyle Allen. The need here is for a backup quarterback. And there's some big names in the NFL out there. Kirk Cousins, Baker Mayfield. Expiring contracts at quarterback, obviously, that's not where the Bills need to be considering. There's some high-profile backups. If the Bills really wanted to go get an expensive backup quarterback, there's options. Ryan Tannehill, Jacoby Brissett, Tyrod Taylor, Sam Darnold, Jameis Winston, Drew Lock, Gardner Minshew, Joe Flacco, Mason Rudolph, Tyler Huntley, a lot of big-time names, if you will, at backup quarterback. None of that makes sense to me. None of that. Josh Allen's literally the most durable quarterback in the NFL. I don't think you need to go out there and invest $5, $6, $7, $8 million into a backup quarterback like I think the list of guys that I just mentioned will cost. I think when you foil those types of players against the guys that I think make sense for the Bills, there's also the layer of time on task. And you have to ask yourself, are we going to pay this expensive backup quarterback who's never played for our team, has never thrown to our targets, does not know our system, or can we go with somebody who's a bit more familiar? And I think that's an important layer because I think the Bills have been a little bit risky here with kind of recycling these backup quarterbacks 1 year at a time and then being one snap away from them having to play without much experience or time with the football team. I think that's a big layer to this. Like, is a high-profile backup that's never been on your team better than just bringing back Kyle Allen or bringing back Mitchell Trubisky? So I don't have as robust of a list at backup quarterback as I did at running back, again, because I think the running back piece is probably the bigger need. That's a play. The Bills, this backup running back that I'm talking about, probably going to play 20, 25, 30% of the snaps, is going to touch the ball maybe 100 times. Versus, well, Josh Allen's literally the most durable quarterback in the league. And as we've discussed before, this backup quarterback, the most important thing that they're going to do is be an asset to Josh Allen in the room. It's not as much about them having to play. It's about how do they support Josh Allen throughout the week, game planning, in practice, on the sideline, in the meeting rooms, right? That's where they really provide their value. It's not that if they have to play, what that looks like. That's certainly a piece of it. But when you have a quarterback like Josh Allen, it's about how do they support them as the backup. That's what's most important. So I'm advocating for bringing back Kyle Allen. I'm advocating for looking at Mitchell Trubisky, who had his 1 year with the Bills before parlaying that into a nice contract with the Pittsburgh Steelers. You know, obviously didn't work out in Chicago, comes to Buffalo for one season. You feel like he really hit it off with Josh Allen. Then he goes to Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh paid him 2 years, $14 million coming out of the Bills, the 1 year with the Bills. And then they actually extended his contract 2 years, 11.3. And then this past season, he was cut. And obviously he was dreadful this past season. So was Kenny Pickett. That offensive infrastructure with Matt Canada and some question marks really throughout didn't present a great opportunity for any of those quarterbacks to play. And I don't feel like Mitchell Trubisky's this slam dunk, you know, your season is saved if you have him. But I think his relationship with Josh Allen, his familiarity with some of the players, he knows Joe Brady. I think that makes a lot of sense. So I'm not going to sit here and talk about Gardner Minshew and Jacoby Brissett and Tyrod Taylor. Those players don't make sense to me. I think that bringing back Kyle Allen, bringing back Mitchell Trubisky to go with Shane Buechele, of course, Josh Allen, I think your quarterback room will be just fine there. There's some lower cost guys, maybe an Easton Stick, maybe a Josh Dobbs, but honestly, just go Kyle Allen, go Mitch Trubisky, maybe draft the guy late, but I don't think the Bills need to be paying a ton of money here for these backup quarterbacks. I think live in this Kyle Allen, Mitch Trubisky world, that makes the most sense to me. Now let's talk tight end, and this might be an even easier conversation because the Bills have Dalton Kincaid, they have Dawson Knox, they have some nice players in terms of futures deals with Tre McKitty and Zach Davidson. Tre McKitty was a third-round pick in 2021 by the Chargers, very athletic player, never been very productive, does have upside, good blocker throughout his career, 34 games with the Chargers spent last year on the Bills practice squad. He's back, and so is Zach Davidson, was a 2021 fifth-round pick by the Vikings. He injured his knee in June and missed the entire season, but he's 6'6", 245 pounds, big-time athlete, 4'6", 240, 6'9", 5'3" cone, 37.5-inch vert. His RAS score is an 8.8. And when he played for Central Missouri, his final season at Central Missouri, 40 catches, 894 yards. That's a ton of yards per catch, 15 touchdowns. Was also all-conference and all-American at punter and tight end. This is a very high upside guy that intrigues me. So Kincaid, Knox, McKitty, Davidson, Quentin Morris is an exclusive rights free agent, which means he's back. There's no question he'll be back. Exclusive rights free agent means that the only option for that player is to re-sign for the team that they were on previously for a minimum contract. There's no other option for them. So of course Quentin Morris is back. So what do the Bills need here? Probably nothing. I mean, we're talking camp bodies at most. Your biggest question mark here at tight end is who's going to be your jumbo tight end, right? David Edwards had such an important role. Hopefully he's back doing the same thing. But I think the Bills are in really good shape here. Across the NFL, there's some big names out there. Hunter Henry, Dalton Schultz, Gerald Everett, Noah Fant. I'd be paying attention to teams in the division like the Dolphins or the Patriots in the big-time tight end market. I think both of those teams would potentially need one of those players. If there's a sleeper in the tight end class of free agents that I really like, it's Colby Parkinson from the Seattle Seahawks, who's got a lot of size and athleticism. I liked him at Stanford. I think there's some untapped potential there. But as far as Bills targets go, unless there's just something I don't know about the mix of Kincaid, Knox, Quentin Morris, Tre McKitty, Zach Davidson, I don't think you need anything more than some camp bodies here. So for the first time in a long time, it feels like tight end is not a productive use of our time to really spend much or invest much time discussing free agent options, because the Bills are pretty deep when it comes to not only established vets, but exciting young talent. And even your bottom of the barrel guys are intriguing in a lot of ways. So the Bills, to me, very, very much set at the tight end position. So you have it. My Bills targets in free agency for quarterback, running back, and tight end. Next up on our conversation will be offensive line and wide receiver. So that'll be tomorrow on the podcast. And then, of course, Brandon Beane's press conference is tomorrow afternoon. So we'll get to all of that here for you on Locked On Bills. Don't miss anything. Make sure that you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.